Little patriotic girl is kicked out of KFC by a leftist, but a Hells Angels biker rushes in and does something that leaves everyone in shock. Subscribe to the channel right now to discover the end of this epic story and comment below which part of this great America you're watching from. The fluorescent hum of the KFC was a low, maddening drone that seemed to vibrate against the greasy tiles of the floor, casting a sterile, unforgiving light upon a scene that should have been mundane, but felt dangerously charged. It was a Tuesday evening, in a town that felt like it was holding its breath, the air inside the fast food joint thick, not just with the scent of fried batter and secret spices, but with a palpable, suffocating ideological tension. In the center of this cold, commercial stage stood Gemma, a figure so small and solitary she looked like a single drop of color in a gray world. She was 14 years old, though in this moment, under the crushing weight of public scrutiny, she looked much younger. Gemma was the embodiment of a specific kind of American innocence that was rapidly becoming an endangered species. She wore a bright red hoodie, the letters USA stitched across the chest in bold white thread, a declaration of love for her country that she wore without irony. Beneath the hoodie, a pastel-pink tutu skirt rustled softly around her legs, a remnant of childhood whimsy, clashing with the harsh reality of the adult world she had stepped into. But it was what draped over her shoulders that drew the eyes of everyone in the room, a star-spangled banner, tied loosely like a superhero's cape, the stars and stripes embracing her small frame. In her trembling hand, she clutched a single crumpled dollar bill, her knuckles white with the effort to keep her composure. The atmosphere in the restaurant was hostile. It wasn't a physical threat, not yet, but a heavy, silent judgment that pressed down from the ceiling. The other customers, scattered across the plastic booths, chewed their food mechanically, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of their smartphones. They were the silent witnesses of the modern age, apathetic and disconnected, already holding their phones up to record, sensing a moment was about to happen, ready to feed the insatiable maw of social media with whatever cruelty was about to unfold. They saw Gemma not as a child, but as a symbol, a target. However, the true source of the terror, the focal point of the oppression that made Gemma's breath hitch in her throat, stood behind the counter. The shift manager was a woman who seemed to have been designed by a committee of radical activists. Her hair was a shock of neon lime green that defied gravity, a visual scream of rebellion against tradition. Her name tag, pinned crookedly to her uniform, read Zan. Her arms were a tapestry of chaotic tattoos, ink that crawled up her neck, symbols of ideologies that viewed Gemma's flag not as a banner of freedom, but as a shroud of oppression. Zan did not smile. She leaned against the stainless steel registers with a posture of practiced arrogance, her eyes narrowing as they locked onto Gemma. It was a look of pure, distilled disdain. To Zan, Gemma wasn't a hungry teenager with a dollar. She was a little MAGA girl, a relic of a worldview that Zan and her cohorts were determined to extinguish. The counter was her podium, the cash register her gavel, and she was preparing to pass judgment. The dichotomy was stark and painful, the vibrant, hopeful red, white and blue of the girl against the cynical, artificial green and black of the antagonist. Gemma took a hesitant step forward, her sneakers squeaking on the sticky floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She remembered her father's voice, deep and reassuring, telling her that the flag represented liberty, that it was a shield for the weak. But here, in the harsh light of the city, the flag felt like a target. She felt the eyes of the green-haired woman dissecting her, peeling away her confidence layer by layer. Gemma wanted to turn and run, to flee back to the safety of her home, but hunger and a stubborn spark of pride kept her feet planted. She just wanted a meal. She just wanted to be treated like a human being. The vulnerability on her face was heartbreaking. Her lower lip quivered, and her large blue eyes were swimming with unshed tears. She was alone, isolated in a sea of hostility, a tiny patriot, facing the towering wave of a culture that seemed to hate her very existence. As Gemma approached the counter, the air grew thinner, the tension ratcheting up to a breaking point. Zan, the manager, straightened up, crossing her tattooed arms. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence stretch, weaponizing it, making Gemma squirm under the glare. It was a power play, a cruel game of dominance. Gemma felt small, insignificant, her belief in the goodness of people crumbling with every passing second. The surrounding customers watched, screens glowing, waiting for the blood sport. No one stood up. No one offered a kind word. The isolation was absolute. Then the bell above the entrance door chimed, a sharp, clear sound that sliced through the thick atmosphere. The heavy glass door swung open, and the mood in the room shifted instantly. A gust of wind blew in, carrying the raw, masculine sense of gasoline, hot asphalt, and worn leather. The light from the setting sun momentarily blinded the room, silhouetting a massive figure in the doorway. He was a giant of a man, a stark contrast to the soft plastic interior of the fast food joint. He wore the uniform of the road, heavy engineer boots that thudded with authority, denim jeans stained with engine grease, and a black leather jacket that looked like it had survived wars. The jacket was the centerpiece, weather-beaten, creased, and adorned with patches that commanded fear and respect. On the back, visible as he turned slightly to close the door, was the unmistakable death head logo of the Hells Angels. He stepped inside, and the room seemed to shrink. He held a matte black motorcycle helmet in one large, scarred hand. His face was weathered, lined by years of riding into the wind, hidden partially behind a thick, grizzled beard that flowed down his chest. His eyes, shadowed under heavy brows, were like flint, hard, observant, and dangerous. He didn't look like a hero in the traditional sense. He looked like a storm that had decided to take human form. He didn't rush. He moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of an apex predator who knows he has no natural enemies in the room. He stopped near the entrance, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the space. The smartphone cameras that had been trained on Gemma now wavered, the users unsure whether to film the new arrival or hide their phones. The biker didn't speak. He just stood there, a dark monolith of old-school America, an archetype of rugged individualism that the modern world tried to pretend didn't exist anymore. He scanned the room, his gaze sweeping over the cowering customers, the sneering manager with the green hair, and finally landing on Gemma. He saw the flag. He saw the tears. He saw the predator behind the counter preparing to strike. His expression remained unreadable, a mask of stone, but his posture shifted imperceptibly. He crossed his massive arms, leaning back against the wall, watching. He was the dormant volcano, the sleeping dragon. The tension in the room had changed flavor. It was no longer just the fear of a child, but the imminent threat of a collision between two very different worlds. Gemma, sensing the new presence, glanced back, her eyes meeting the biker's dark sunglasses. She felt a shiver, not of fear, but of awe. The stage was set. The victim was exposed. The villain was ready, and the unlikely guardian had arrived, bringing with him the thunder of the road. The heavy silence that followed the biker's entrance was brittle, like dry twigs ready to snap. But Zan, the manager with the neon green hair, seemed determined to pretend the massive figure by the door did not exist. She turned her attention back to Gemma, and the air behind the counter seemed to curdle with her renewed focus. The dollar bill in Gemma's hand, wrinkled and warm from her palm, was thrust forward slightly, a peace offering in a war she didn't know she was fighting. "Please," Gemma whispered, her voice trembling so much it barely carried over the hum of the soda fountains. I just want a snack box. I have the money." It was a plea of heartbreaking simplicity, the kind that should have elicited a smile or a nod in any normal establishment in any normal town. But this was not a normal moment. It was a staged execution of character, and Zan was the self-appointed executioner. She looked down at the dollar bill as if it were a piece of radioactive waste, with a slow, deliberate motion that was theatrical in its cruelty. She pressed a button on the register that locked the drawer shut with a loud, final clack. "We don't serve your kind of money here," Zan said, her voice dripping with a toxic mixture of condescension and performative outrage. She didn't mean the currency was invalid. She meant the person holding it was tainted. She leaned over the counter, invading Gemma's personal space, the smell of stale coffee and sharp chemical hair dye wafting off her. "And we certainly don't serve people who come in here dressed like that." Her finger, adorned with a chunky silver ring shaped like a skull, jabbed accusingly at the American flag draped over Gemma's shoulders. The gesture was violent in its suddenness, making Gemma flinch and take a step back, clutching the edges of the flag tighter. "Do you think this is a joke?" Zan continued, her volume rising as she played to the audience of smartphone cameras that were now openly pointing in their direction. "Do you think you can just walk into a safe space wearing a symbol of oppression and hate? That flag stands for colonization, for slavery, for everything wrong with this country, and you're wearing it like a costume." Gemma's breath hitched. Her world was spinning. She looked down at the stars and stripes, the fabric her grandfather, a man who had lost a leg overseas, had given her. He had told her it stood for courage. He had told her it stood for the promise that anyone could be anything. Now, this woman was twisting those memories into something ugly and unrecognizable. "No!" Gemma stammered, tears spilling over her lashes and tracking through the light dusting of freckles on her cheeks. It's for my grandpa. It's for America. I love America." The admission was soft, pure, and utterly devastating in its innocence. But to Zan, it was fuel. The manager threw her head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound that lacked any mirth. "She loves America," Zan mocked, projecting her voice to the customers in the back. "Did you hear that? She loves the system that keeps people down. Listen to me, you brainwashed little brat. Your patriotism is just a cover for intolerance. You were a little MAGA puppet, aren't you? Probably repeating whatever your toxic parents scream at the TV." The humiliation was escalating rapidly. Gemma felt shrinking, as if the floor were opening up to swallow her whole. She looked around for help, her eyes darting to a middle-aged man in a suit at the nearest table. But he quickly looked away, tapping furiously on his phone, terrified of intervening and becoming the next target of the green-haired fury. The isolation was total. Zan, sensing her victory, moved from verbal abuse to a demand for submission. She pointed to a trash can positioned near the counter, its swinging door stained with ketchup and grease. "If you want to eat in my restaurant," Zan hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits, "you're going to take off that rag right now. You're going to take that symbol of bigotry off your shoulders, and you are going to put it where it belongs, in the trash." The command hung in the air, shocking in its audacity. Gemma froze. The demand was a physical blow. To throw away the flag was unthinkable. It was like being asked to throw away a part of her soul, a piece of her family. She shook her head, her blonde ponytail swaying, her whole body trembling with the effort of resistance. I can't," she sobbed, clutching the fabric so tight her knuckles turned white. "Please don't make me. It's mine." Zan's face twisted into a mask of fury. The refusal was an affront to her authority. She stormed around the side of the counter, bypassing the barrier that separated the staff from the customers. She moved with aggressive speed, her boots stomping on the tiles. She towered over Gemma, using her height and age to physically intimidate the child. "I said, take it off," Zan screamed, reaching out. Her hand, with its chipped black nails, grabbed the edge of the flag. Gemma screamed, a high-pitched sound of terror, and tried to pull away. "Stop! Leave me alone!" But Zan held fast, yanking the girl forward. The force of the pull nearly knocked Gemma off her feet. The beautiful red hoodie with the USA lettering stretched, and the pink tutu swirled frantically as the girl struggled to maintain her balance and her dignity. "You are triggering everyone in here," Zan yelled, justifying her assault with the buzzwords of her ideology. "Your existence is an act of aggression. Give me that flag." The tug-of-war was grotesque. A grown woman, fueled by ideological hatred, physically wrestling a 14-year-old girl for a piece of cloth in the middle of a fried chicken restaurant. The customers were no longer just filming. Some were murmuring, a low buzz of discomfort. But the paralysis of the modern bystander effect held them in their seats. They were witnessing a moral crime, but fear of the mob kept them silent. Gemma was sobbing uncontrollably now, her resistance failing against the superior strength of the adult. She felt the flag slipping from her fingers, felt the sacred fabric being desecrated by the hate-filled grip of the manager. She felt utterly abandoned by the world. "Why are you doing this?" she wailed, her voice cracking. "I didn't do anything wrong." Zan sneered, leaning down so her face was inches from Gemma's, her breath hot and angry. "You exist. That's what you did wrong. People like you need to be taught a lesson. We are rewriting history, little girl, and you are on the wrong side of it." Zan gave one final, violent yank. Gemma stumbled, her knees hitting the hard, greasy floor with a painful thud. She didn't let go, but she was on the ground now, huddled in a ball, covering her head with one arm while clutching the flag to her chest with the other. She was the picture of total defeat, a child crushed by the weight of a culture war she was too young to understand. Zan stood over her, panting slightly, flushed with the adrenaline of her bullying. She looked down at the weeping girl with a look of triumph. She had won. She had humiliated the symbol. She prepared to deliver the final blow, to kick the girl out into the street, to complete the ritual of cancellation. She opened her mouth to speak, to deliver the final verdict that would crush whatever spirit Gemma had left. The despair in the room was absolute. The light seemed to dim. Hope was a distant memory. Gemma squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the next scream, the next shove, praying for it to end. She was broken, but the final blow never landed. The air inside the restaurant had become a vacuum, void of oxygen and mercy. On the dirty, grease-slick tiles, Gemma lay curled in a fetal position, a small, trembling island of red, white, and blue, amidst a sea of indifference. She was no longer crying out. Her voice had been reduced to a soft, rhythmic hiccup of terror, her hands clamping the stars and stripes to her chest, as if it were a life-preserver in a hurricane. Looming above her, Zan, the manager with the neon-green hair, seemed to grow in size, her shadow stretching long and distorted across the floor. The adrenaline of unchecked power coursed through Zan's veins, flushing her face with a triumphant, feverish heat. She had stripped the girl of her dignity. Now she intended to strip her of her symbol. Zan reached down, her fingers hooked like talons, aiming for the fabric one last time. "I'm going to burn this rag," she spat, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for Gemma. "And then I'm going to have you banned from every store in this town. You're finished." It was in that precise nanosecond, the space between the threat and the act, that the atmosphere in the room shattered. It didn't begin with a shout. It began with a sound that was felt more than heard. A heavy, metallic clunk that reverberated through the countertops and rattled the plastic trays. The massive biker, who had been a silent statue by the door, had dropped his helmet onto the nearest table. The noise was like a gavel striking a judge's bench, final and authoritative. "That's enough." The voice was low, subterranean. A rumble of gravel and diesel that seemed to vibrate in the chest cavities of everyone present. It wasn't a request. It was a command issued by nature itself. Zan froze, her hand hovering inches from the flag. She turned her head slowly, her eyes widening as she realized the mountain by the door was moving, and he was moving fast. The biker, let's call him Gunner, crossed the distance of the dining area in 3 long, thunderous strides. The kinetic energy he generated was terrifying. He didn't walk around the tables. He moved through the space with such force that customers scrambled backward, knocking over sodas and dropping phones in their haste to clear a path. He was a tidal wave of black leather and righteous fury. He didn't stop at the partition. He didn't respect the "employees only" sign. He vaulted the low, swinging gate of the counter area with a grace that belied his size, his heavy engineer boots landing with a deafening thud right next to Gemma. For a moment, time suspended. Gunner stood between the prostrate girl and the stunned manager. He was a wall, a fortress. Up close, he was even more terrifying. The smell of him, old leather, stale tobacco, high-octane fuel, and the metallic tang of the road overwhelmed the sterile scent of the fast food kitchen. He towered over Zan, easily 1.5 feet taller, his broad shoulders blocking out the harsh fluorescent lights, casting the manager into his shadow. Zan stumbled back, her boots slipping on the slick floor, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The arrogance that had fueled her just seconds ago evaporated, replaced by a primal, lizard-brain fear. She looked up into Gunner's face and saw no mercy. His beard was a thicket of grey wire, and his eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses until this moment, were revealed as he slowly took them off. They were steel grey, cold and hard, the eyes of a man who had seen things on the asphalt that would make Zan's ideological Twitter battles look like nursery rhymes. "You got a lot to say to a little girl," Gunner said, his voice deceptively calm, a low growl that promised violence if provoked. He took a step forward, forcing Zan to take another step back until she hit the stainless steel warming racks. "You feel big, don't you? Pushing around a kid, ripping a flag off a child's back?" She was provoking. Zan stammered, her voice shrill and breaking. She tried to summon her usual buzzwords, her script of victimhood, but they died in her throat. "She's a symbol of hate. I have the right to refuse service. I am the manager." "You ain't nothing," Gunner cut her off, his voice rising like a revving engine. He pointed a finger at her, a digit thick as a sausage and scarred from wrenching on bikes. "You think that hair and those tattoos make you a rebel? You think you're fighting the man?" He laughed, a dry, barking sound that terrified the room. "I'm the one society warned you about, sweetheart. I'm the outlier. And let me tell you something about that flag you tried to grab." Gunner didn't look back at the flag. He knew it was there. He kept his eyes locked on Zan, pinning her to the warmer. "That flag? It's the only reason you get to stand there looking like a radioactive parrot and spouting your nonsense without getting dragged off to a gulag. Men and women died in mud and sand, bleeding out so you could have the freedom to be an idiot. My brothers died for that cloth. And you use that freedom to bully a 14-year-old girl?" The silence in the restaurant was absolute. The smartphone cameras were still rolling, but the hands holding them were shaking. The narrative had shifted. The oppressor was now the protector, and the activist was revealed as the tyrant. I'll call the police," Zan shrieked, desperate to regain control, grasping for the very authority she usually claimed to despise. "I'll call corporate. You're threatening me. This is assault. I'll have you cancelled. I'll put this all over the internet and you'll lose your job." Gunner leaned in close. So close Zan could see the pores on his nose and the white scars in his beard. He smiled, and it was a wolf's smile. "I don't have a job, lady. I have a brotherhood, and we don't get cancelled. We don't care about your hashtags. We don't care about your feelings. We care about respect. And you just ran out of it. He slammed his hand onto the metal counter next to her head. Bam! Making Zan yelp and cower, covering her face. You threaten a child again in this town, anywhere near my club, and the police will be the least of your worries. Do you understand me? Zan nodded frantically, tears of terror now streaming down her face, ruining her makeup, black streaks running down her cheeks like oil. She was broken. The bully had been bullied by reality. She slid down the cabinet, making herself small, defeated not by violence, but by the sheer, crushing weight of a superior moral force. Gunnar held her gaze for one more second, ensuring the message was burned into her soul. Then he turned his back on her. To him, she no longer existed. He knelt down on the greasy floor, his leather knees cracking, ignoring the filth. His demeanor changed instantly. The monster vanished, replaced by a gentle giant. "Hey, kid," he said softly. Gemma, who had been watching through her fingers, slowly lowered her hands. She looked at the man who had just dismantled her tormentor. Up close, he smelled like smoke and danger, but his eyes were kind. "You okay?" Gunnar asked, his voice a low rumble. Gemma nodded, sniffling. She wanted to throw it away. "I know," Gunnar said. He reached out with a large, calloused hand and gently adjusted the flag on her shoulders, straightening the stars. "But she didn't. You held the line. You did good." He reached into his leather vest pocket and pulled out a crisp, clean $20 bill. "You stood your ground. That takes guts. Most grown men in this room didn't have the stones to do what you did." He looked around the restaurant then, his gaze sweeping over the customers, who were now staring with shame. "Show's over," he barked at them. "Eat your food or get out." Turning back to Gemma, he offered his hand. It was the size of a catcher's mitt. "Come on, let's get you off this floor. The stars and stripes don't belong in the dirt, and neither do you." Gemma took his hand. It was rough and warm. He pulled her up effortlessly, as if she weighed nothing. For the first time since she entered the store, she felt safe. But the tension wasn't fully gone. Zan was sobbing in the corner, clutching her phone, already typing furiously, likely spinning a web of lies to her online followers. Sirens could be heard faintly in the distance. Someone had called the cops. The system was still the system, and Gunnar was still an outlaw. The battle was won, but the war for the narrative was just beginning. Gunnar stood tall next to Gemma, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, a Hell's Angel guardian for America's daughter, waiting for whatever the world would throw at them next. The wail of sirens that had been a distant threat suddenly crescendoed into a deafening reality, painting the interior of the fast food restaurant in erratic pulses of red and blue light. The heavy glass doors swung open again, this time admitting 2 police officers who entered with hands resting instinctively near their holsters, their eyes scanning the scene for the reported violent disturbance. Zan, the green-haired manager, saw her salvation. She scrambled up from the floor, regaining a fraction of her frantic energy, and pointed a trembling finger at Gunnar. "Him! That maniac!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical desperation. "He assaulted me! He threatened my life! He's a domestic terrorist! Arrest him immediately!" She was playing her final card, relying on the institutional machinery she claimed to hate to destroy the man who had dared to stand up to her. She expected the officers to see the leather, the patches, the beard, and the size of the man and immediately perceive a threat. She relied on the stereotype to do her dirty work. But the scene that greeted the officers was not one of chaos, but of strange, suspended order. Gunnar stood like a monolith, calm and unmoving, his hands clearly visible and open, resting non-threateningly at his sides. Beside him stood Gemma, no longer the cowering victim on the floor, but a small figure standing upright, her tears drying. The American flag draped proudly over her shoulders once more. The dynamic in the room was palpable. The monster looked like a guardian, and the victim behind the counter looked like a cornered rat. The senior officer, a man with greying temples and eyes that had seen enough of the city's madness to know better than to trust first impressions, looked from Zan to Gunnar, and then to the little girl. He didn't draw his weapon. He walked forward slowly, the tension in the room shifting from fear to anticipation. "Officer, why aren't you shooting him?" Zan yelled, losing her grip on reality. "He's a white supremacist. He attacked a woman of color. He's hate speech in human form." "Quiet, ma'am," the officer said, his voice level and firm, cutting through her tirade. He turned to Gunnar. "We got a call about a disturbance. You want to tell me what happened here?" Before Gunnar could speak, a voice rang out from the back of the room. It was the businessman who had previously looked away. He stood up, phone in hand. "Officer," he said, his voice shaky but gaining strength, I have a video. I recorded the whole thing." Then a mother at another table stood up. "Me too. That man didn't touch her. He stopped her." Suddenly, the dam broke. The silent majority in the restaurant, who had been cowed into silence by the fear of being labelled or cancelled, found their courage in Gunnar's shadow. One by one they stood up, a chorus of voices defending the biker and the girl. "She knocked the kid down. She tried to steal her flag. The biker just helped the girl up." The truth, documented on a dozen screens, flooded the room, washing away Zan's lies. The narrative she tried to construct of the victimized activist and the evil patriot collapsed under the weight of objective reality. The officer looked at Zan, his expression hardening. "It seems we have conflicting reports, ma'am, and a lot of evidence against you." He turned to his partner. "Get statements from the witnesses." Then he looked at Gunnar, and for a brief second, the professional mask slipped. The officer's eyes lingered on a small, faded patch on Gunnar's vest, a unit patch from a conflict long ago. A subtle nod passed between the two men. It was the unspoken language of those who serve, a recognition of the warrior class that transcends uniforms. "You're free to go, sir. We can handle it from here." Gunnar nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. "Just making sure the kid got her chicken, officer." Zan gasped, realizing her power was completely gone. She shrank back against the friars, the whispers and glares of the customers now fully turned against her. She wasn't just defeated. She was exposed. The very community she claimed to speak for had rejected her cruelty. She would have to answer to corporate, to the police, and eventually to the internet, where the videos of her bullying a child were already beginning to circulate. Not as a triumph of social justice, but as a testament to her intolerance. Gunnar turned to Gemma. The heavy atmosphere of the restaurant felt suffocating now that the battle was won. "Come on, kid," he rumbled. "This place smells like lies and burnt grease. Let's get some air." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, guiding her towards the door. As they walked, the customers parted, creating a path of respect. Some nodded, some whispered, "Thank you." Others just watched in awe. It was a procession of victory. Gemma walked with her head high, the flag flowing behind her like a royal cape. She wasn't just a girl who liked America anymore. She was a survivor. She had looked into the face of hatred and hadn't blinked. They stepped out into the cool evening air. The parking lot was bathed in the orange glow of streetlights. Gunnar's motorcycle, a massive custom Harley with chrome that gleamed like silver in the moonlight, sat waiting like a steed. Gunnar took a deep breath of the fresh air, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out not a weapon, but a bottle of water and a protein bar. "Here," he said, tossing them to her. "Better than that fried garbage anyway." Gemma caught them, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. You saved me." Gunnar leaned against his bike, crossing his arms. He looked at her seriously. "I didn't save you, Gemma. I just leveled the playing field. You held onto that flag when she tried to rip it off you. That was all you." He pointed a gloved finger at the stars and stripes. "You know what that stands for. It ain't just cloth. It ain't just politics. It's the idea that nobody gets to tell you who you are or what you can say. It stands for the grit to stand alone when the whole world is screaming at you to kneel." He knelt down one last time so he was eye level with her. The rough, scary biker looked like a grandfather imparting sacred wisdom. "There's going to be a lot of people like her in your life. People who hate you because you're happy, because you're proud, because you love your country. They'll call you names. They'll try to shut you up. They'll try to make you feel small so they can feel big." He tapped the USA letters on her hoodie. "Don't let 'em. You got a spine of steel, kid. You're an American. That means you don't back down to bullies, no matter what color their hair is or how loud they scream." Gemma nodded, feeling a surge of warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. The fear that had paralyzed her was replaced by a concrete resolve. She felt the spirit of her grandfather, the spirit of the pioneers, the spirit of the soldiers Gunnar spoke of. She wasn't isolated. She was part of a long, unbroken line of patriots. "I won't," Gemma said, her voice clear and strong. "I promise." Gunnar grinned, his teeth white in the beard. "Good girl." He stood up and straddled his bike. The engine roared to life with a thunderous explosion of sound, a mechanical lion waking up. The ground vibrated beneath Gemma's feet, a feeling of raw power. Gunnar put on his helmet, but before he flipped the visor down, he gave her a two-finger salute. "Stay free, little patriot." With a twist of the throttle, he was gone, peeling out of the parking lot and merging onto the highway, a black streak disappearing into the American night, returning to the road where he belonged. Gemma stood alone on the curb, but she wasn't lonely. She opened the protein bar, took a bite, and looked up at the sky. The stars above twinkled, mirroring the stars on the flag wrapped around her. She adjusted the fabric, pulling it tighter, not out of fear, but out of love. She watched the tail light of the motorcycle fade, feeling a new strength coursing through her veins. The world was loud and sometimes it was mean, but she knew now that she had the roar of freedom inside her, and that was a sound that could never be silenced. She turned and began the walk home, the flag billowing softly in the wind, a young heroine walking into a future she was now ready to face.